When a leader speaks not just for their nation, but for an entire continent, people listen. Ibrahim Traoré, Burkina Faso's president, has sent a clear and shocking message to Kenyan President William Ruto, one that reverberates far beyond the borders of their countries. Chapter 1. A Continent in Crisis. Africa today is at a crossroads. From rising insecurity to deep-rooted corruption, millions of people across the continent are struggling to live with dignity and hope. Families are being torn apart by kidnappings and violence. Children are being deprived of basic education, and communities are forced to fend for themselves while leaders remain seemingly indifferent. But why does it feel like these problems persist no matter how much change is promised? Why does the leadership that is meant to protect and empower the people so often fail them? Burkina Faso and Kenya are two nations that paint a stark picture of the leadership divide in Africa. On one hand, we have Ibrahim Traoré, a young and dynamic leader determined to address his nation's deepest challenges. On the other hand, we have William Ruto, whose presidency in Kenya has left many citizens questioning his commitment to solving the country's most pressing issues. Chapter 2. Traoré's hands-on leadership. In Burkina Faso, Traoré's leadership has been a game-changer. When he took office after the fall of the previous government, the country was riddled with instability and insecurity. Terrorist groups had taken hold of vast regions, abductions were rampant, and trust in the government was at an all-time low. But Traoré refused to sit behind a desk and issue commands from afar. Instead, he immersed himself in the challenges his people faced, engaging directly with citizens, listening to their concerns, and involving them in creating solutions. His leadership style is defined by transparency, accountability, and a hands-on approach that has delivered real, tangible results. For instance, Burkina Faso has made remarkable progress in curbing insurgency under Traoré's rule. His administration has reclaimed territories previously controlled by militants, restored law and order in many regions, and bolstered trust between the government and the people. His focus on empowering communities to take an active role in their own security has set a powerful precedent. Chapter 3. Kenya's struggles under Ruto. In Kenya, the story is far different. Long hailed as East Africa's economic powerhouse, Kenya now finds itself entangled in a growing crisis of unexplained disappearances, escalating repression, and eroding democratic freedoms. Since mid-2024, at least 82 citizens have vanished, a grim pattern that has sparked fear, anger, and a demand for accountability. When William Ruto assumed office, he promised sweeping reforms that would address corruption, insecurity, and economic challenges. Yet, for many Kenyans, those promises have rung hollow. Corruption scandals continue to plague the administration, and funds meant for public welfare are often mismanaged or disappear altogether. Rising crime rates and abductions have left citizens feeling abandoned by a government that seems disconnected from their pain. Take, for example, the recent increase in abductions in Kenya. Entire communities live in fear as criminals exploit the lack of effective security measures. Parents are terrified of sending their children to school, and businesses suffer as insecurity stifles growth. Unlike Traoré, Ruto's leadership has been criticized for being distant and focused more on maintaining political power than addressing the needs of ordinary Kenyans. Many feel that his government has failed to provide the safety and stability they so desperately need. Chapter 4. The Cost of Poor Leadership. The failures of governance in Kenya extend beyond insecurity. Economic struggles, inadequate healthcare, and a failing education system compound the challenges faced by everyday Kenyans. The mismanagement of resources, coupled with corruption, has deepened the gap between the government and the people. In contrast, Burkina Faso under Traoré has demonstrated what can be achieved when leadership prioritizes the needs of the people. His administration's efforts to improve education, healthcare, and agriculture have not only uplifted communities, but also attracted foreign investment in key sectors. Why can't Kenya, a country with vast resources and potential, achieve the same? The answer lies in the approach to leadership. Chapter 5. The Disappearing Voices. The wave of disappearances sweeping through Kenya is alarming, both in its scale and its brazenness. At least 6 cases have been reported in the past 2 weeks alone, marking a chilling acceleration. The victims are often young men and women, many of whom have dared to voice criticism of the government or participated in organizing protests. Their disappearances are methodical and sinister. Witnesses recount armed men in unmarked vehicles seizing individuals in broad daylight. Often, the abductors identify themselves as police officers, yet the government consistently denies any involvement. For the families of the missing, the nightmare is compounded by a lack of answers. Law enforcement agencies refuse to investigate, leaving loved ones in agonizing limbo. Human rights organizations like Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch have documented these cases extensively, revealing a grim pattern of torture, secret detentions, and extrajudicial killings. It's a terrifying echo of Kenya's past, a dark chapter many hoped was firmly closed. Chapter 6. A Fractured Democracy. The seeds of Kenya's current crisis were sown long before the disappearances began. President William Ruto rose to power in 2022 after a fiercely contested election against Raila Odinga, while the judiciary upheld Ruto's victory. But the political climate remained tense, marked by allegations of irregularities and deep-seated mistrust. Ruto's subsequent policies, including controversial tax reforms and perceived consolidation of power, only deepened public discontent. By mid-2024, frustrations reached a boiling point. Protests erupted in response to proposed tax hikes aimed at reducing Kenya's debt burden. These measures included increased levies on fuel and essential goods, disproportionately impacting the poor and middle class. What began as localized demonstrations quickly evolved into a nationwide movement, uniting Kenyans across ethnic and political lines. The government's response was swift and severe. Security forces were deployed to disperse crowds, often with excessive force. Reports of arbitrary arrests, harassment, and beatings became commonplace. Chapter 7. Silencing the Digital Resistance. One of the defining features of the current crisis is the targeting of digital dissent. Social media has become a powerful tool for political mobilization in Kenya, providing a platform for citizens to organize, share information, and hold leaders accountable. Yet, this digital revolution has also made activists more vulnerable. Analysts suggest the government's repressive tactics have adapted to this new reality, focusing on silencing voices that gain traction online. A recent report by the Kenya National Commission on Human Rights highlights the role of a shadowy police unit believed to be behind many of the abductions. Operating under the direct supervision of senior government officials, this unit reportedly views enforced disappearances as a necessary measure to maintain order. Chapter 8. Human Rights on the Brink. Kenya's history of extrajudicial practices is well documented. During the Moi regime in the 1980s and 1990s, enforced disappearances and summary executions were common tools of political repression. Many hoped that the transition to multi-party democracy and the passage of a progressive constitution in 2010 would mark the end of such practices. Yet, under President Ruto's administration, these dark methods have resurfaced. Human rights advocates argue that the disappearances are symptomatic of a broader erosion of democratic freedoms. The right to protest, to speak freely, and to assemble, cornerstones of any democracy, are increasingly under threat. Reports of torture and secret detentions paint a harrowing picture of a government willing to go to extreme lengths to maintain control. Chapter 9. Public Outrage and Resistance. The disappearances have ignited widespread outrage across Kenya. Protesters have taken to the streets in cities nationwide, demanding accountability and the release of the abducted. Vigils and awareness campaigns, organized by civil society groups, aim to keep the issue in the public eye. Opposition leaders have called for independent investigations, while human rights organizations continue to document abuses and pressure the government for answers. The international community has also begun to take notice. The United Nations has urged the Kenyan government to respect its citizens' rights to freedom of expression and peaceful assembly. Several countries and organizations have expressed concern over the deteriorating human rights situation, though their influence remains limited. Chapter 10. A message that resonates. Ibrahim Traoré's warning to William Ruto is not just a critique. It's a reminder that the time for empty promises and passive governance has long passed. The abduction crisis, rising crime, and economic challenges are not just statistics. They are the lived realities of millions of people. What Traoré offers is a blueprint for change. His leadership philosophy, rooted in service, engagement, and accountability, is something that resonates not just in Burkina Faso, but across Africa. Citizens everywhere yearn for leaders who listen, act, and put the people's needs above personal gain. Kenya's struggles are not occurring in isolation. Across East Africa, governments are increasingly resorting to authoritarian measures to maintain control. In Uganda, Tanzania, and Rwanda, similar patterns of political repression have been observed, raising alarm about the erosion of democratic norms in the region. For Kenya, the stakes are particularly high. As a regional hub for trade, diplomacy, and security, its stability is critical to the broader East African community. The current crisis not only threatens Kenya's internal cohesion, but also undermines its international reputation as a bastion of democracy. Chapter 11. Collaboration for a brighter future. Africa's challenges are interconnected, and no single nation can tackle them alone. Leaders like Ibrahim Traoré have emphasized the importance of collaboration, not just within countries, but across the continent. By sharing knowledge, resources, and strategies, African nations can build a more unified and resilient future. This collaborative spirit is essential for addressing issues like abductions, corruption, and economic inequality. Traoré's leadership offers a glimpse of what is possible when African nations prioritize the well-being of their people over political ambitions. His message to Ruto and to all African leaders is clear: the time for passive leadership is over. Chapter 12. A crossroads for Africa. As we stand at this critical juncture, the choices made by leaders and citizens alike will determine the future of the continent. Will leaders rise to the occasion, like Ibrahim Traoré, and take bold, decisive action to address the challenges facing their nations? Or will they continue down the path of complacency, allowing insecurity and corruption to erode the fabric of society? For Kenya, the path forward requires more than just promises. It demands action. William Ruto must recognize the urgency of the crisis and take steps to rebuild trust, restore security, and address the systemic issues plaguing his administration. For Burkina Faso, Traoré's leadership must serve as a model and a source of inspiration. His bold stance against violence and corruption proves that change is possible when leaders put the people first. Do you believe it's time for a new wave of leadership in Africa? Let us know in the comments below. If you found this discussion meaningful, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss our latest content. Africa's story is still being written.